at the Friedman Conference and I'm talking to Nick Gillespie, the editor of Reason. And I wanted to ask you, Nick, about what you think about the idea that the right has sort of won a lot of policy and economic battles, but the right have potentially lost the culture wars. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I'll say two things. One is that when we're talking about the right, we're talking about kind of broadly free market oriented, classical liberal leaning, limited government people who might be conservative or libertarian. Interestingly, I've been involved in America, the American libertarian movement for 25 years about. And we've always been talking about how we need to win the cultural battle. And, the left won the 60s because they had better clothes and better music. And you still hear that. People are obsessed with, like, how do we get libertarian or conservative movies or TV shows made? And I think part of it is a fundamental mistake that when you win economic battles and when you win certain types of trade battles, you've won the culture war. And I'm a big fan of going to places like Whole Foods in America, which is this, incredibly kind of high-end grocery store that just has tons of different types of vegetables and foods and products from all over the country. Its clientele is overwhelmingly college educated and liberal, if not progressive, but they love going there. And that's as much a part of the culture as a TV show on HBO or Comedy Central's Daily Show. And I think we need to start thinking about culture differently, and that it's not discrete artifacts that get kind of extruded and then exert an influence on people. It's a process. And we're all making and we're consuming and producing our own culture on our own terms, and that's a win.
Okay, that's an interesting way of framing it. I was thinking in terms of comedians in America have suggested that they're afraid of going to college campuses because they don't want to be accused of racism or sexism or some kind of other label. Yeah. And I would imagine that constricts the culture.
Yeah, it does. And that goes into a larger question about speech. Part of it is also with stand-up comedy in particular, I think students are also they're kind of less immersed in the past, and like the best stand-ups and the stand-ups who talk about not going to college campuses, and that can be people like Bill Maher or Jerry Seinfeld or Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle. They're actually really pretty literate comics, and they make a lot of references to the past or other comedians, etc. And I think part of it is not just that students have, in many cases, have lost a sense of humor, but they also don't get jokes in the same way that they used to. So it's a little bit more complicated. But that question about free speech and about the policing of everyday speech is a really big problem in the United States. I know it is here as well. And it's particularly grotesque at the university, because if there is one place that was created as a kind of carve out from commercial society or a day-to-day society where dangerous ideas and that facts can lead anywhere and we need to discuss them. The idea that it's the universities in America that are leading the challenge against free expression is really disturbing.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, you do have the First Amendment, so it's not a legal issue, it's a social kind of norms issue. Can you speak more to the social norm of censorship?
Yeah, there's an outfit in America called the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, and they do a lot of, they step in when students are accused of, bad behavior or bad speech, and they oftentimes come in and they're able to reverse the, whatever the campus findings are on something. And but one of the things that they talk a lot about is it's not just that free speech is being pinned down, but the very idea of a free and open and robust exchange of ideas, and that unfettered free speech and where you don't have prior review or prior restraint. That idea is disappearing in America, at least, and it's very disturbing because if we are classical liberals, if we are libertarians, if we're kind of American conservatives or European liberals, free speech and free expression is the thing, along with free assembly. I mean, like, you need that, and it comes out of a right of conscience, of religious battles in England in the 17th century, where you have to talk about very serious issues that you are going to disagree on. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And I to be honest, I don't know how you bring back that reverence for the idea of free speech and of a marketplace of ideas, especially in a world where marketplaces are being demonized by both the right and the left. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't like open marketplaces. He wants fair trade. So does he want fair speech, even though he's very politically incorrect? We're in a moment where I think we need to go back and kind of look at the the Enlightenment really, and the basis of that, and the idea that individuals have certain rights, individuals have autonomy, and that implies a right to free speech and free expression. And we really need to start going back and looking at why that was important and why that separated, I think, the broadly defined West from other parts of the country. And it is that freedom of expression, the freedom of inquiry, and of an open society.
I've noticed that the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson has, he's complained about this constriction of speech and exchange of ideas on university campuses in Canada as well. And he said that the university is moving online. If the university means to debate ideas and to preserve culture and history, all of that is now shifting online. What do you think of that suggestion?
I think more broadly that a lot of things are, the university is changing, and it always is changing. It's kind of like the Catholic Church, where universities pretend that they've been doing exactly the same thing the same way forever. But in fact, in the United States, for instance, after World War II, the mission of the university and the way that it conducted its business changed radically. And it was better. It was more inclusive and more emancipatory, and also more research focused. And I think the main goal of a university is to be a site of knowledge production in whatever discourse, and that's its vital role. Teaching is a secondary role. But what I was going to say is that I think that a lot of things are leaving the university, or they're changing the way they do business. Because if you're in the arts, if you're in business, if you're in all sorts of fields, if you're in literary and cultural studies, which I'm more familiar with, you can't do what you want to do because you're constantly being kind of checked and cock-blocked by your colleagues or by administrators. And so what happens is that people bypass the university. And, I started grad school in the late 80s, I guess, and people were always talking about is American culture coarse and vulgar, and it's not really serious or literate. Nobody says that anymore, but it's not coming out of the university. It's coming out of all of these places, kind of temporary autonomous zones or free play spaces that have been created through YouTube, through Facebook, through the internet, through cheap printing technology. The zine revolution in the 80s, it was mostly because people started working in offices where they had free access to copying machines, and you could crank out 100 copies of the magazine you wanted to read. And it just, that's not happening in the university because it's a very constipated and stultified place. And it will continue to both the right and the left, at least in the U.S., oftentimes they talk about the university really as a kind of high-end tech school. The idea is that you go to college to get a job, and that's a really impoverished way of looking at higher education and critical inquiry, and and learning new methodologies by which to explore and engage the world.
And it's just waiting to be disrupted by the internet. If companies can work out a way to give credentials to test students properly without students having to pay $100,000 or more.
Right. And in the United States, there's it's odd that we have some private universities, but about probably 85 or 90% of students go to state-supported schools. Every state, and the federal government, which also gives lots of money. We're starting to understand that that can't go on forever, and so we have something like 4,000 four-year colleges in America, and that's almost certainly too much, too many. There's a bubble there, and that bubble is going to pop. And I think people are going to start recognizing that college. And I say this as somebody, I not only went to college, I went to grad school, and I got a doctorate, and I love learning, and I love the academy at its best. But it's, there are other ways to get that information or that experience. And I think people are starting to do that more and more.
Yeah. So if you're talking to a young person, maybe 18 years old, and they suggested that they might not go to university, would you sort of agree that there are other options?
Yeah, although it was funny because my older son, a couple years ago, he graduated from Ohio State last year in high school, and my ex-wife, his mother, is a university professor, and he started playing that on us, and we were like, you know, it's great for other people, but there's no fucking way you're not going to college, and we realized after a certain point he was just trolling us, but it worked. But yeah, it's, you know, college is and again, I think what is great about it is, especially in you know, if you're going to be a computer scientist, if you're going to be certain types of jobs where you can get the training in the workplace, it's probably better to do that. For things like the humanities, which I find extremely important, and they're everywhere under attack for good reason, because the practitioners deconstructed their object of study and they said there was nothing special about literature or art or even history, or that it all reflects in a negative way, you know, kind of the racist, capitalist, you know, exploitation, the nature of our society. The humanities have helped to destroy themselves, but that's one place you should go to school for that, because you don't get that. You don't get immersed in a discourse community in the humanities, I would say, as much as in some other majors. You can get that in a job somewhere.
All right. Well, thanks for chatting to us, Nick. If you like that video, please click like and subscribe.